Being as big a fan of Warhammer Fantasy as I am hugely excited for the eventual release of the Old World. Sure, this whole project might not come around until I'm 40 years old at the rate that GW is milking the Horus Heresy, but when that does finally happen, I will be happy to dive right into this exploration of an era largely left to the historical background of the setting. For those of you whose only knowledge of fantasy lore comes from this channel, first of all, shame on you, go read Gotrek and Felix right the hell now. But more relevant to the video, the Old World is Games Workshop bringing back Warhammer Fantasy, square bases and all, in a time period set roughly 200-ish years before the end times in modern Warhammer Fantasy. Unfortunately, this means no Karl Franz or pretty much any of the human characters, but on the bright side, there will be a whole new bunch of human to get attached to, potentially including the second best emperor in all of Warhammer, Magnus the Pious, also known as the Magnus who actually did nothing wrong. And almost every other faction's main goobers will still be around, such as Tyrion and Teclis, Malekith, and most importantly of all, Settra the Imperishable, he of many titles and kicker of many asses. There's a whole load of things going on in this era of the setting, such as the Time of Three Emperors, where the Empire of Man had some real trouble staying together, as well as the Vampiric Wars and the Great War Against Chaos. You probably don't need me to tell you what those ones were all about. But before I blow my load over the Old World too hard, there's a few worries I'd like to put into words for you here. Mostly because I think I can make a funny video out of it, but also to discuss some legitimate concerns I have for what we might get out of this setting. Why don't we get into that? First off is a simple one, and that worry would be that GW would retcon a whole load of stuff. Now this era of Warhammer Fantasy is much less well defined than the one before the end times ruined everything, but all that said, what there is, I worry they might screw with things unnecessarily. Take, for instance, Emperor Magnus the Pious. Unless I am massively wrong about the man, he seemed like a genuinely good guy who loved his nation and wanted to prevent chaos from waffle stomping it to hell. And I worry that GW might do with him what they did with the God Emperor and turn him into a complete asshole for drama's sake. You know, something like a reveal where he actually hates the Empire to the very core and everyone in it, and the only reason he acts at all is to save his own skin. Sorta like Caiaphas Cain, but not played for laughs, he's just a straight prick in this scenario. It's that kind of thing that worries me. But there's plenty of other ways they might do things wrong. In that same vein, I worry they might Horus Heresy the setting up. That's absolutely nonsensical, so let me explain. First off, and this is a concern I've heard a few others bring up online, I worry they might just ignore 80% of the factions in game in exchange for going all in on the Empire and Chaos, giving races like the Elves and Dwarves the best of few mentions before going back to humanity. Now to be fair on this point, Warhammer Fantasy has never really been as bad as 40k in regard to author favoritism towards one faction. The High Elves accomplished a million times what the Eldar can dream of doing, the Dwarfs are the reason humanity has almost all of its tech, and the Vampires are for the most part just as threatening as Chaos. And to top that off, this time period is just as influential on the other races as it was humanity. While the Empire was sorting out the whole Three Emperors business, Malekith was busy invading Ulthuan, and Thorgrim Grudgebearer was coming to power amidst the Dwarfs and giving them a whole new outlook on the world. That outlook being, how about instead of just complaining about all of our grudges, we actually do something about it. A revolutionary idea, I know. And to top it off for a second time, this still continues on into Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Even though the Stormcast are the favorite child, it's not to nearly the same extent as the Marines are in 40k. And I believe GW has said that they'll add, or I guess re-add, more races as the game progresses. But to get back to being a stick in the mud, this is still GW we're talking about. If the idea of someone saying something and doing something else is inconceivable to you, please direct your attention to any politician ever. Just because they've been good for so long with this doesn't mean they can't still cock it all up. Kind of a weak way to wrap up this sphere, I admit, but it's Games Workshop. We all know they can screw something like this up very easily if they see a cash cow tempting enough. I don't think they will, to be entirely fair to Games Workshop, but if I'm gonna grumble, I'm gonna make sure all of my bases are covered. Another way they might Horus Heresy up applies to real life, the matter of money. In fact, to be honest with you, this isn't me talking about something I worry the Old World might or might not have. This is just gonna be something you have to live with. To elaborate here, the Horus Heresy is mostly done through Forge World. Forge World is rather expensive. If you've somehow kept your humanity intact thus far and avoided seeing Forge World prices, please go do so now to see what I mean. While there's decent odds that some of the factions like the Lizardmen would be able to escape this, I mean their entire roster in AOS is pretty much just intact from fantasy, the newcomers on the block like Kislev and Cathay might get the Forge World Deluxe treatment, which means I hope you like resin models bent out of shape that cost you an arm and a leg. The sphere is also prevalent for armies at AOS cut from existence as well. The High Elves are almost entirely gone, and the Doom Kings are entirely gone. Same goes for the Horse Molesters, but they can continue rotting in oblivion for all I care. It would not be at all shocking if Games Workshop brought these armies back exclusively through Forge World, because what better way to make money than to nickel and dime your customers as much as possible. One other worry I have is them doing something that manages to ruin Age of Sigmar too. Something along the lines of Magnus the Pious, despite his success in driving back chaos, saw that victory was ultimately impossible because the authors declared that they were going to win in the end. And thus he created a super duper magical artifact that will save not this world but the next one. After all, since the end times in AOS are still gonna happen, why not just say fuck it and declare whatever the hell you want canon? Ruin fantasy by making everyone involved know that the world is screwed right out of the gate, and ruin AOS by making all the important things happening there only come about because of something people did in the old world. There is some potential for this to actually be a good thing. I did read somewhere that a Lizardman lore drop revealed that the end times are yet another step forward in the great plan of the old ones, which, while kind of stupid, is the cool kind of stupid. But as far as Warhammer goes, declaring something to be a plan or artifact of the old ones is a great way to make people accept that this is okay. It's the old ones, people know nothing about them and yet assume they're the ultimate end-all be-all of everything, so if they're doing something like this, that's fine. Whereas if some random schmuck from the Empire comes up with something like this, that might not be so good for the setting. And to be honest with you, and maybe my cynicism is just really shining through here, I feel like they just end up screwing it up. And this final negative is something that's very much unrelated to Games Workshop. Do you know how goddamn angry people got at the end times? Very, and rightfully so, I might add. Imagine someone killed your mom and then replaced her with a genetically modified clone. No matter how awesome a mom the clone is, your original mother is still dead. That's the end times and release of Age of Sigmar in a nutshell. No hyperbole at all, those things are exactly equivalent to one another. Now the whining has calmed down mostly, thank God, but some people still gripe about Age of Sigmar with varying degrees of legitimacy to their complaints. But tell me, do you think we live in a world where, the moment this thing releases, you aren't going to have to slog through thousands of idiots complaining about it online before you can actually see something worthwhile about it? That what you'll mostly see won't be 100 different variations of Nerf Magnus the Pious' Command Aura or some shit the moment this game comes out, drowning out any actual feedback or constructive criticism the game might get? Hell, at least a complaint like that has some merit to it. They're trying to give feedback on balance. How many complaints do you think we're gonna get that are gonna amount to nothing more than old world bad, Games Workshop sucks? The game's not even out yet and people are already dropping the worst takes possible on it, and when it releases, it's not gonna get better. Some people complain that GW is just taking attention away from AOS and should leave the old world behind for good. Others complain that GW is trying to win back favor with the fans they snubbed the first time they killed the old world. Sometimes I log onto the Brain Dead Bird app and I not only see people complaining about a game that isn't out yet as if they've already played it, but people complaining about the people complaining about the old world. In fact, to be entirely honest with you, I really hope this video ends up on one of those threads. I don't know what the name of whatever emotion I would feel from that is, but I know it would give me a raging erect. But rather than cutting the video here, how about we switch tracks? I've already complained your ear off, but allow me to do something that almost no Warhammer content creator has ever done. Express my hopes for some good things that Games Workshop might do with all of this. Plus, if you were paying attention, you would have noticed that a lot of the downsides I listed were immediately followed by a way the downside could be mitigated, or even potentially be a good thing. Even the one about listening to people complaining can be fixed by not going on Twitter, which is something you should be doing by default except to follow my account so you can look at my shitposts. First positive, more Warhammer fantasy lore to live in. This is an obvious no shit Sherlock situation, I admit, but is that such a bad thing? We get a deeper dive into a once only briefly touched upon era of the series. Why wouldn't that be a reason to celebrate? Even if we know the world is ultimately doomed, it'll be nice to get back into this setting and just exist in it for a while. As for some more specific benefits, there's decent odds that the old world might cut down on the rules bloat that Warhammer Fantasy had in the end. Now fair's fair, I haven't played original Warhammer Fantasy on account of the system being long dead by the time I started getting into tabletop properly. But from everything I've read, it seems like there maybe were a few things that could have been simplified down a bit. Technical nuance is good, but to make a statement that'll probably make me sound like a total plebeian, I'd rather have fun. The old world gives a chance for old school Warhammer Fantasy to be streamlined and made more approachable, which is certainly a good thing. Also, having now dead Warhammer armies resurrected would be fantastic. I would quite like some Tomb King models, especially Cetra the Many-Titled, but unfortunately the only options I have are some second-hand models going for 5 times the original price, or third-party recasts from websites that look like they were made in 1990. Getting official versions of armies like this that have been axed would be fantastic. Yeah, there's going to be a price hike, but I stand by my belief that it's better for these models to be available at a higher cost than just erased from existence. And even if they don't get new models, it'd be good to have them back, especially since most factions they got haven't really developed in between the time period the old world takes place in and modern Warhammer Fantasy took place in. Yes, even the hated Bretonnians. If they aren't in the game to be bullied at every opportunity, then what's the point of bullying them? To move on before I start foaming at the mouth after saying something remotely positive about Bretonnia, this model thing also means that players like myself who got into Warhammer through Total War games won't stumble around confusedly wondering why the setting they're looking for doesn't exist. Granted, by this point Total Warhammer's in its 3rd game, so most people probably know what's up by now, but it's still a chance for people who only care about getting models from their video game to get into the hobby. Now for the big guns, Cathay and Kislev will finally get fully playable tabletop armies. Kislev has had some presence on tabletop before, but to my knowledge, Cathay's presence has always been firmly in the realm of background lore. The most I could find on that was an old copy of either Heavy Metal or White Dwarf where they showcase some Bretonnian archers converted to be Cathay units. Isn't it funny how Bretonnia is best done when they're not being used as Bretonnians? But I digress. While Cathay has only had minimal impacts on the lore before, Kislev has always been fairly important if underrepresented. But both of them certainly deserve something, so seeing these places finally get the tabletop armies they deserve is highly welcome. Lastly, to end on something that might be naive, but something I hope for nonetheless, the old Old World gives a chance for Games Workshop to fix the end times up a bit. Now they've gone ahead and stated the end times are still going to be canon, they aren't retconning them away, but perhaps they'll retcon some of the bad aspects of the end times. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Perhaps they'll retcon some of the worst aspects of the shitshow that the end times was almost in its entirety. And this is some really wistful thinking on my part, but Storm of Chaos is supposedly an alternate continuity, remember? If this game does well enough, maybe we'll get another one of those. Maybe instead of there only being 2 active Warhammer settings, we'll get 3. Age of Sigmar, 40k, and Warhammer Fantasy rising from the ashes of his destruction. That was an overly dramatic way of saying give me Karl Franz back and I don't give a damn. Of course, this is all my personal speculation. Pretty much nothing I said is hard fact. I need to say this because when you give an opinion on the internet, every armchair analyst will flood to your comment section informing you why this is stupid and wrong and you should commit self-explode. Now that I've said this is all an opinion piece, they'll still do that, except there will be 1 or 2 less of them in the comments. And of course, what do you think? Any spicy prediction of yours in the waiting? If so, let me hear them, even if they're incredibly stupid. Because I'm sure mine are stupid, but I put them out here for all you to see anyways. As always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You were the awful prediction to my arrogant Twitter commentator. I don't know how that makes any sense, I just desperately want to see one of my videos cause some fuckhead on social media to have a meltdown. Does this make me an asshole? Probably. Are these people justified? Potentially. But the important thing is, it might be funny. If you'd like to support the barely disguised garbage that this channel is, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. And remember, I didn't name a single Twitter account or anything like that by name. If you think I'm referring to you specifically, then I'd like to congratulate you on projecting so hard I could have used you to give a class presentation.